Well, good morning. Welcome to a Dr. Childress Answers Your Question segment. Today, I'm going to be answering a question from a parent. It's not about court involved psychology, although it's applicable. I'm a full service psychologist. I have early childhood background as well. And this was a question from a parent who has a 3 to 4 year old child. And they emailed me asking me the question basically about tantrums and defiance. And I told them that, I'm not licensed in your state. I can't really do anything or answer you. But I figured I would come on YouTube and just provide a broad, general answer to the question, which I think will be a specific answer to the question. And that might be applicable to both this particular parent, but to a number of parents' early childhood, as well as to the parents in the family courts with a little adaptation. The kids in the family courts are essentially a developmental stage behind. So today I'm going to answer early childhood questions for a 3 year old, uh, 4 year old child with tantrums. So here's a basic question, which is my child is 3 to 4 years old, has severe tantrums and defiance, also diagnosed with sensory motor processing issues. What can I do? Well, the sensory motor processing issues, I'm not going to discuss those today. That's occupational therapy, and get a good occupational therapy evaluation and sensory motor integration occupational therapy. A lot of the schools do just fine motor kind of occupational therapy because they care about writing and things. You really need a more comprehensive sensory motor integration. And that's going to affect the arousal and the defiance and the ability to change, transition between situations. So that's a prominent feature of the defiance and tantruming is difficulties in transitions. They get kind of locked into where they are and they're regulating their sensory information and things, and then they have to change and everything gets all dysregulated. So an occupational therapist will be immensely helpful with that. What I'm going to talk about is the psychology side of that. Given that you have some support on the sensory motor side of things, what can you do relative to the emotions and the relationship, defiance, tantrum, those sorts of things when it's occurring? So, the first thing, what we're going to talk about is the development of the emotional system in early childhood, in 0 to 5. And because that's what we're having trouble with, emotional dysregulation, behavioral dysregulation, defiance. Um, and the emotional system uh, develops based on how we interact with it. And so it progresses through a series of stages in early childhood. And down at the bottom is the earliest stage. That's with infancy, the first year of life. And at that point, emotions are explosive and expressive. So if you think about an infant, boy, when they're upset, they just scream like it's no tomorrow. And it's not happiness, it's joy. And it's not sadness, it's sorrow. And it's not anxiety, it's terror. It's like all the emotions are just extreme at that point. And those are called catastrophic emotions. And what's going to happen in the first year of life is that the mother typically is going to be responding to the child's catastrophic displays of emotion by trying to figure out what's going on. Is this a cry that has to do with hungry? Is this a cry that's a poopy diaper? Is this a cry that's sleepy? And as the parent comes in and tries to understand what the cry means, the kid goes, wait a minute, somebody's listening to me here. And their cry changes, which is into the next phase of development, which is emotional signaling. And that's typically in the preschool period when that develops. And what's happening is the catastrophic emotion is being brought into communication So they're now trying to communicate to somebody because somebody's listening to them. But that's emotional signaling. They're still not using your words. And that period, sort of the end of infancy, it gets set up in infancy, that emotional signaling around eating and sleep and those things. But it gets more developed, more specific during the preschool years. Now, during the preschool years, we have some language coming on. It's not fully developed yet. 3, 4 year olds, kind of proto language developing. And it's during that period, though, that we're helping the child develop emotional signaling. They can't use their words yet. They don't know what these different experiences inside have labels to them, and the language isn't developed yet. So they have these emotions, and we want to bring those emotions into the communication system. So they're trying to communicate to us with their emotions. That means we have to listen. Now, when we do that in preschool age range, that moves the child up even further to where, because they do have some language during preschool. So now if we continue to listen and help move them through emotional signaling into verbal communication, and that's where we get the 5-year-olds and beyond, hopefully, where they're using words to communicate their emotions rather than these emotional displays. Now, that doesn't always develop along those lines. And so we will get, third graders, fourth graders who are still in catastrophic emotion, to where they just break down and they're having these emotional displays, or they haven't quite moved into verbal expression of their emotions. So wherever they are, we start with that, and then we put them back on that track by listening to them. I'll talk about that in a second. How do we get kids on this track? It's not through behavioral psychology. Don't put them on a timeout and start, trying to get a hold of their behavior. We have to respond to what's going on inside. What does the emotion mean? What are they trying to communicate? What problem are they having in the world? Because that's what the emotion's signaling. I'm having some sort of problem, in the world here. Can I get some help? It's called protest behavior. And so come on over and say, what's going on, little guy? What's your problem? And see if you can help them figure it out. So what happens, one of the challenges is a lot of times that this gets off track. And so by the time the child's 5, 6, 7, they're still in the catastrophic emotional display, and they haven't moved up to verbal. And so everybody's saying, well, use your words. And they're trying to get them up into the verbal communication of emotion. The problem is that skips a step. And so you can't get there. A child in catastrophic emotion, their emotions are too intense. They cannot use their words for that emotion because their whole nervous system is kind of collapsed into chaos. And so that's trying to skip a step. And so it's important that we move through all 3 phases. The first phase will be the emotional signaling. Then comes the language. So what we're going to do, early childhood, is we have these emotional displays. We're going to bring them into the communication system. Now, in terms of the brain, the language and communication system is one system, but it's got 2 parts. One is communication, and that's heavily linked into the emotion system. We do a lot of emotional communication. The other is the language, and that's linked into the thinking system. And so we have the language and communication system. We embed our language in our emotional signaling, and it's a rich communication. So what we're doing is we're bringing the emotion part in and bringing that into the communication system. What that then does is it opens up the thinking system. So now we bring the emotions into the communication system, and then we start to open up the language into the thinking system. Language is up in the cognitive systems. And so when we do that, then interestingly, the cognitive thinking systems inhibit the emotion systems. And this is important to understand. These two systems, thinking and feeling, they cross inhibit each other. If I'm thinking, I don't feel. If I'm feeling, I don't think. Now, hopefully, we keep both of them kind of on most of the time, and we kind of a little bit think and a little bit feel. But if you get really thinking, if you bring it up into the cognitive, you will get inhibition on your emotions. And if you allow your emotions to get a hold of you, then you're going to lose your thinking capacity. So they cross inhibit each other. So what happens here, as we bring those emotions into the communication and then up into language, then we get an inhibition on the emotions and they become quieter. And that's the important feature to understand about this, is the child cannot bring their emotions into the language system as long as it's a catastrophic emotion, as long as it's intense. So we have to lower the intensity of what they're experiencing, which will then allow them to bring that into the communication system. That's how it's all designed to work. That we bring it into communication, we get a suppression on the intensity of the emotion because the emotion is now being brought into the communication system, and we can't do that with catastrophic emotion. And so we move it in. And that's essentially the development of the self-regulation, the emotional regulation systems in early childhood. We get them. Now, if you see a child who's on that catastrophic emotion, expressive, explosive displays, well, you just figure they're about the preschool age range in terms of their emotional system development. So you go back and you give them what they need from the preschool kind of period. So essentially, what this diagram shows is we bring the emotional signaling that someone is listening. They're interpreting the behavior and the emotions as if they had communication value. When we interpret them as having communication value, that we give them that value, and the child will begin to communicate with them because we've imposed communication intent onto the emotional expressions. And then once we do that, then we get it up into verbal language of use your words. And so it's a progression through to about 7 years old. A lot of it happens in the first 5. So returning again to the emotional development here, you start with the catastrophic emotions, basically infancy, explosive, expressive. Then we move it into the emotional signaling. Someone is listening during the preschool period, and then the emotions into the words for the 5-year-olds and moving beyond. Now, how we do that, how we listen to the child, how we bring their catastrophic emotions into emotional signaling and then into language, is by our intention. And this is important to understand. I'll have other talks about intentions. Because our brains are designed to read the intention of other people, not what they say and do, and that's all very interesting. Why are they doing it? What's their motivation for doing what they do? And that's the source of a lot of our psychological connection systems are trying to figure out what's motivating the other person, what's their intention. So I advise parents that parenting is not about what you do. Parenting is about who you are. So the first thing you want to do in interacting with your child is organize what your intention is. And I would recommend that the intention not be to suppress the child's behavior. I've got a tantruming child, they're being defiant, I want to get rid of that problem behavior. No, it's a protest behavior, it's a communication. If you suppress their tantruming and their their defiance through your behavioral techniques. You can punish them, and put them on timeout or take away their toys or stuff. All of those are going to have bad consequences I'll talk about elsewhere. But if you try to suppress the problem behavior, um, then you're actually suppressing communication. You're not responding in a way that somebody's listening, so they're not going to bring that catastrophic emotion into the language system or the communication because you're not listening. You just don't want to hear it. Just stop the behavior. So don't do that. Okay. The intention is not to suppress the behavior. The intention is to help the child figure out what's going on and help the child solve the problem. So the first change is it's not a problem behavior, it's a protest behavior. It's designed to communicate something. It's also designed to annoy you because the brain, this nervous system, wants you involved. So it gets annoying to bring you over. And what I strongly recommend is you come with an intent to understand. Now, there's 4 basic intentions you can bring. An intent to task, which is basically homework. I don't care what you think or feel. You need to be suppress that and do the task. Homework, for example, chores, those sorts of things. The other intent is an intent to change. That's when the child's being annoying for some reason or in dangerous situations. And I don't care what you think, feel, or want. You need to change what you're doing. Okay. And so those are the first 2. The third one there is intent to be with. This is just so simple and lovely. It's just, I just want to be with you for no particular reason. My intention is just to hang out. A lot of times I recommend this is if your child's playing video games, an older child or something, you just go in and watch them play the video game. Just watch. That's an intent to be with. You just like being with them. The classic way I explain this, like in couples, intent to be with, is let's say I'll be talking to the father or the dad, the husband in the situation, and I'll say, if your wife's in like making dinner, cooking or something, walk into the kitchen and say, what can I do to be helpful? Okay, well, that's a great question. What can I do to be helpful? And she'll say, nothing, I got a handle on it. Don't walk away. Don't leave. Typically we go, yay, and then we're off watching TV or something. No, pull up a chair and sit down. Because she's going to then go, why is he still here? I said, there's nothing he, oh, he just wants to be with me. And it's a wonderful feeling of just, they just want to be with you for no particular reason. They're just like being with you. For kids, that's communicated a lot of times in a little rub, pat or something, or your little pet names for you, and, your little nicknames, your affectionate little bonds. That's your intent to be with. And then the final one, the one I recommend that you use a lot, is an intent to understand. And that's, again, really simple, but really fragile. Now, the first 2 of those, intent to task and intent to change, those are, excuse me, those are maturation building intentions. Because what you're asking to do, the child has all sorts of emotions, wants, and needs. You're asking him to get a handle on those and to suppress those in service of getting a task done, school project or something that's some task. And so you got to kind of get a handle on your emotions, or to get along socially, to change and social regulation. So again, get a handle on what your emotions and those build maturation. Self-regulation capacities. The other 2 are relationship building ones. Now, those 2, the relationship building ones, get totally crushed by the task and change. So use them one at a time and be clear as to which ones you're using. And you can use them boom, 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 from one sentence to another. So you come in to a situation, come in with an intent to understand what's going on. What happened here? And then as you learn information, you can go to an intent to task. Well, you know what? Let's clean this up and let's do this over here. And then you go back to, intent to be with and give them a big hug or something, so you can bounce around these. Just be kind of clear as to where you are. A fake intent to understand that parents do a lot is actually an intent to change, or intent to task, where they'll come in and say, why did you do that? Now that sounds like I'm trying to understand what happened, what's going on for you, and intent to understand why did you do that. But the moment the child says, well, it's because of this, they say, well, that wasn't a good idea. Here, do this or do that. That it's basically just trying to get our reasons so that the other person can tell us why our reasons are invalid and we should do what they want. So it's really an intent to change or intent to task covered with an intent to understand. Don't do that. So when you come with an intent to understand, it's very fragile. So stay cleanly in it. Boom. Just what's it like to be you? And so that's the critical one. All the others are really nice, very helpful. This is the one that really needs to be amplified. It will be wonderfully helpful for the child's development. It's called scaffolding. It's called the eyes of the other. It has wonderful impact. So the intent to understand, as I was just saying, is incredibly simple, and incredibly fragile. And this is the entirety of it. What's it like to be you? That's the entirety of my being as I'm interacting off of this with the child. What's it like to be you? Help me understand that. In a lot of ways, I describe this, it's like the child's world inside is kind of black. They kind of know what they feel, but they don't, it's darkness. They don't know what's going on inside. And so we bring what's called the eyes of the other. That's what this intent to understand is. The eyes of the other is like a lantern into the darkness. And we bring it in, we help them. The child's walking around with us because they're kind of, what's going on? I don't know. And they're trying to explain it to us. And we go, oh, look at this chair. It's tipped over. No wonder you keep tripping. And oh, look at this thing over here inside. And we're helping them illuminate their inner world. And so that's the intent to understand. Then we can switch over and advice or something else later on. But be clean on it. Come in and give the child a heavy dose of that. And then final thing, I'll wrap up here today. For all parents everywhere, but especially in early childhood, smile, smile, smile. We want a relaxed parent. We want a comfortable parent, a happy parent. There's basically 4 emotions: angry, sad, afraid, and happy. 2 are power emotions. That's angry, which is dominance, and fear is submission. 2 are social emotions. That's happy, social bonding, and sad draws nurture. Now, we have a connection system in our brains that we're not like billiard balls. We actually interpenetrate each other, and our nervous system synchronize and stuff. Now, of those 4 emotions, happy is the one that synchronizes. Happy is the one that gets the 2 brains flowing together. It doesn't have to be overjoyed, just pleasant, and boom, your brain's in a background state of happy, pleasant, relaxed. The child can enter that brain and synchronize. If you're angry, that pops the child out immediately. There's no connection to an angry parent. Boom. And so now the child's alone. Okay, you get loneliness kind of stuff going on inside. And angry creates toxic brain chemicals. So if you use angry to kill brain cells because you want to kill them, if a child wants a toy, goes up to the other child, hits the child, and takes the toy, I want all those brain cells that kind of hit the child, I want them gone from that pathway. And so angry will do that. Michael, what are you doing? Stop that. And it'll put a little toxic chemical in and kill off some brain cells that hit the other kid. However, you've now got toxic brain chemicals in the kid. So you want to clean those out and say, Mom, Michael, why did you hit the kid? What's going on? Come here. Give me a hug. Okay, so what's going on? Intent to understand, little affection, clean up those brain toxins. So angry will always pop a child out. And so you can't get that. Nobody's listening to you because they're angry. Sadness will do the same thing. If a parent is really sad and the child tries to bond to that parent, bam, that's too painful. It just pops right out. And you'll see that when a child these videos we do with the children, and they'll be with a depressed mother. With a depressed mother, they can't look at her. They just turn away. Um, and so that is, it's just really heartbreaking to see those videos. A child just cannot stand a depressed mother. Depressed parents, depressed mother in early childhood is devastating because the child loses all that breach in contact. So sad pops the child out. Anxious does the same thing. If a child tries to bond to a parent who's really anxious, the child goes, oh, and the child becomes really anxious, and everybody's running around being really anxious. And eventually the child says, I can't do this. This is too painful to be part of that child. You never develop the synchronicity or the synchronous brain states. So what you want to do is, as much as possible, you want to stay in a brain state of happy. Look how simple I did that. I can go from a background state of angry to a background state of happy with a little smile. Now, that you can fake it, yeah, okay, and it works. When you smile, you drop a little happy chemical in your brain. It's better living through neurochemistry, so it's not faking it. You're actually just changing your brain chemistry a little to add happy to whatever the baseline is. But with more valuable than the smile is to get to the core of the issue for especially moms in early childhood, but any parent, all parents, is to help you get into that relaxed place authentically. That you're a relaxed parent, that you're a happy human, that you're a pleasant person to be around. And so a lot of times for my therapy if I'm for this type of issue, I've got defiance and behavioral dysregulation, emotional dysregulation. I'm going to get an occupational therapy assessment for the sensory motor stuff. That's kind of basic, and let's get that taken care of. Then I'm going to teach about the intent to understand and emotional signaling into language and get that inhibitory network coming down. But I'm also going to do some collateral work with the parents to help enrich their lives, get them to be a happy parent. What's the stresses in your life? How can we lower those stresses so that we have a happy parent that the child can bond into? So adapting this to the family courts, pretty simple, same thing. Okay. So with the family courts, with older children or the situation, you have a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old who's basically a toddler. They're crying and screaming or angry and explosive, expressive emotions. They're not communicating their emotions. It's not verbal, definitely. And it's not even emotional signaling. It's just explosive, expressive. So we want to do the same thing, intent to understand. And we come in, bring the lantern in, help the child understand their experience. Now, the part of a little wrinkle on that is this is a factitious disorder. So what I've talked about with the early childhood is real stuff. I mean, that's what's going on in the brain. With the court involved stuff, it's not real stuff. It's a fake disorder. It's a false disorder imposed on the child. We would do the same thing for the disorder, but we gotta protect the child. We got a child abuse situation, and so it's a little bit different. But the therapy ultimately is going to move in the same direction of helping the child move from explosive, expressive emotions into emotional signaling through an intent to understand, into verbal language and communication and negotiation and maturity. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this. Dr. Childress answers your questions. If you have additional questions, somebody, I'm a full service psychologist. I can tell you about a lot of stuff. But mostly I'm going to be focused in the family courts for a while. So with that, have a nice Sunday here, and everybody take care.